under EU rules, the state where a migrant first enters the European realm becomes legally responsible for adjudicating that person's status. You have to remember that the European states all belong to the Geneva Convention. They've adhered to the Geneva Convention, which involves a promise then that they will consider all those people who claim to be asylum seekers. They will adjudicate their cases. It should be said, if you don't know this, states, sovereign states, are under no legal obligation, okay, to, they can exercise their sovereignty and turn away an entrant, okay? That right remains. But the goal of the Geneva Convention is that states will take the very costly undertaking to see if the applicants for asylum are really refugees in terms of the Geneva Convention. And that's a difficult adjudication, a very costly adjudication process. And so 1990 then created the system that has been challenged by the ongoing crisis. And it would seem that the Dublin regulation, that entire asylum system, has been overwhelmed. And what Chancellor Merkel did was she opted Germany's sovereign right to ease the regulations. Mrs. Merkel concluded that Greece simply wasn't able to meet the expectations of the Dublin regulation, and I applaud her for that. I think it was pretty obvious, but it's not clear where we're going. So we have within the EU a broken system, and increasingly the international refugee regime also appears to be a broken system. But that's a somewhat different and broader question than the EU, of course. Okay? Hope that helps.
So, first of all, does anyone have any questions or anything they'd like to ask Mr. Miller? Professor Miller? And I should mention there's coffee upstairs, so if anyone would like to take a break at any point, you're more than welcome. I don't mind anyone walking in and out of the room, although you shouldn't miss the presentations because they're going to be.
No, I was just curious to know that if everyone knows the difference between an asylum seeker and a refugee in the room. I mean, is everyone clear on what the difference is?
I don't know.
No.
Clarify it.
Okay, because I think this is quite an important issue in what Mark said, is that the rights of asylum seekers are completely different to the rights of refugees. So when we're talking about practical actions that we can take as computer developers or making project proposals, etc., you need to know that the user group will be different if it's an asylum seeker, and it will be different if it's a refugee, it will be different if it's a migrant with no legal status, etc. So I was wondering, Mark, if you could just maybe explain the difference between the rights of asylum seekers generally in Europe, like the lowest common denominator, and maybe the rights of refugees.
Yeah, well, there's a great legal difference. I mean, an asylum seeker is there at the toleration of the state, and states most of the democratic states of Western Europe make some effort to make a preliminary assessment whether there seems to be a plausible or possible case for an individual foreigner or migrant, if you wish, to make an application for asylum. And so oftentimes people in that, the practice of the various member states varies, but oftentimes money and lodging will be made available to them, certain social services as well. But their application can be denied. And ordinarily, when an application is denied, that person is going to go through some kind of exclusion process or deportation process, and that can be a very controversial thing because the general rule is you can't return even failed asylum seekers to their states if there's the likelihood or the possibility that some adverse thing will befall even a failed asylum seeker. So you have in the EU member states, you have growing populations of migrants who are failed asylum seekers. They're not seen, they don't qualify to be regarded as refugees under the Geneva Convention. But their presence is tolerated because the homeland is too dangerous for them to be returned to. Now, a solution that many European states have adopted for that is to create a legalization process for failed asylum seekers. Okay, and even countries that eschew, that is to say, they think legalization policy is counterproductive and they don't pursue it. I'm thinking Switzerland and Germany in particular, they have opened up legalization policies as a humanitarian measure to relieve these populations of being in this limbo, if you wish, that is created when they're not seen as refugees, but their homeland is seen as too dangerous for them to be returned under the Geneva Convention. Once they are refugees, they have many legal entitlements. It varies from states to states, but just about all the member states try to quickly integrate these refugees who have been recognized into their societies. A major problem, of course, is finding employment, and that's why our colleagues' efforts in France are so much appreciated. Even though when they're legally admissible and acceptable, doesn't mean that they aren't viewed as problematic. And that's unfortunate, but it's a reality in these societies. But it's important to point out that we can be critical of European or even American policies towards refugees, but they're very different than situations in most of the third world. As we heard in several of our sessions, over 80% of all people in a refugee-like situation are found outside of Europe and outside of the most advanced democracies. And states like Lebanon and Turkey and Jordan that are very much in the news today, they regard these people as refugees. They call them refugees. But the states, they do very little to integrate these populations. Mainly they're put in camps, and increasingly what we're seeing is refugees going into camps, and they're becoming like the Palestinians who've been in camps, since '48. And this is increasingly the case of refugees around the world. And this spells deep, deep trouble for everybody.
Sorry, can I clarify something just about the Jordanian case? Neither the Jordanian government nor UNHCR Jordan actually considers Syrians and Jordan refugees. They use the word laji'in, which is refugee in Arabic and colloquially, but UNHCR uses, according to UNHCR, there are 0 Syrian refugees in Jordan. They are all asylum seekers because the government has a very specific, sensitive policy towards that because of the Palestinian issue.
Precisely.
So they're actually not considered refugees. And according to the government, there's about 1.2 million, whereas for UNHCR, there's about 59,000 registered currently. But when UNHCR started using the word refugees in the mid-2000s for the Iraqi case, they almost got themselves persona non grata out of Jordan by the Jordanian government. So they had to be very sensitive with the Syrian context to use the word asylum seeker in all documentation. And also UNHCR, I believe, Greta, you can comment on this as well, I'm sure. The obligations, once UNHCR gives someone refugee status, also changes because then they either have to be integrated into the country that they sought asylum in, or they have to be resettled, or they have to return. I mean, that's not a possibility.
But they are being resettled in large numbers from Jordan.
No, they've only had about 40,000 over the past 4 years.
But that's quite large numbers in terms of resettlement.
Sure, but compared to the total number. But that doesn't mean that they become refugees when they're given resettlement. That they're asylum seekers in the next country.
No, because to be resettled, you have to have refugee status.
But the documentation that every Syrian has in Jordan says asylum seeker until the point of resettlement.
Yeah, exactly.
Until the point of resettlement.
You're correct. Yeah. But for UNHCR to resettle someone, they have to be a UNHCR mandated refugee. So for our purposes of resettlement, because I work with the Jordanian office from Paris, they have to have under UNHCR the status of a refugee. Mandate status. UNHCR mandate. Not because Jordanian don't do the refugee status determination, but they'll have it under UNHCR.
But doesn't UNHCR Jordan make that status determination only once countries open up their quotas?
Yeah, and that's only for resettled refugees. Yeah.
So once the option of resettlement is there, then they reinvestigate the case?
Yeah, but
okay.
They don't. They do refugee status determination only for people who are identified for resettlement.
Okay, yeah.
And then the
so
other thing in Jordan is the big problem now is the fact that the Jordanian government have just said that they'll give legal right to work to certain Syrians to increase the integration. But how do you give the right to work to an asylum seeker? And because they've said that asylum seekers don't have the right to work.
Well, and they also said they're going to give 5 job options to Jordanians for every 1 Syrian.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So I'm just going back to what Mark said is, I mean, in a really practical sense, the difference is that if you're an asylum seeker in a lot of countries, you don't have the right to work, for example. So in France, you don't have the right to work as an asylum seeker up till 9 months. They've just changed the legislation. If after 9 months they haven't determined your case, they haven't given you a yes or no whether you're a refugee or not, or they haven't sent you to the next level of like the appeal status, then you can work because they've deemed it like humanely irresponsible to let someone not work for 9 months. But within those 9 months, an asylum seeker cannot work, whereas a refugee does have the right to work. So those are 2 different things. So if, for example, the project I set up to get employment opportunities for asylum seekers and refugees, it would be dumb to go towards asylum seekers because they don't have the right to work. So I'd advise you when you're creating like sort of theoretical projects in your head to really look back at the legal boundaries or limitations dictating the people in the markets or the countries that you're looking at, basically. And then there's, besides the sort of refugees or refugees arriving in a country and how their status is determined, Paula works in a place where refugees are in transit. So, you know, refugees in transit have also a different profile towards refugees arriving somewhere and integrating somewhere. So I think, Paula, maybe you would like to add.
Yeah. Just before we, can I just add to what Professor Miller's comments, just to respond real quick, and then just about the. So I think Mark made a really good description. He adequately described the difference between the status of refugees and asylum seekers. There's just one point I wanted to add. All EU member states who have signed on to the 1951 Refugee Convention also have a legal obligation to give asylum to refugees who are protected under international law. So when it comes to Syrians, Afghans, Iraqis, in the vast majority of cases, they all are protected as refugees under international law, so they cannot be sent back to their country of origin where they would face persecution. So this is an important distinction that I think, I mean, of course, in Europe they respect that. The difference being that economic migrants, and this is one of the discussions that have come up, do not cherish those same protections. So I mean, this is one of the issues which is currently being debated in Europe. If you're an economic migrant entering Europe, you don't have the same protection as refugees do, and you can be sent back in theory. And this is a determination of the status that needs to take place upon their arrival in Greece.
Because I don't have a background in law at all, but what I see is that people are being registered every time again when they cross the border in Europe, and that is a highly inefficient process, and it's getting worse because there's a lot of political actions that are happening that are completely uncoordinated. And so also the data from a technological point of view doesn't match very much. And for example, if I'm a guy who's, I don't know, maybe underage, and then on one border I try and say I'm 21, and then I say I'm underage again, and I change my name, that data gets lost. And we've been trying to actually also come up with alternative recommendations. But since it's not as holistic as you would think, and as it is being communicated, I find it very difficult to actually focus too much on the legal status of a person because it's changing so much.
And the other challenge is the Schengen-Dublin agreement. Like when Mark was explaining, when it was first instituted, the rule was you register where you enter first, when you step foot on. So in theory, all the refugees who are entering from Greece should be registered in Greece, and they should be. But of course, in reality, it's not possible yet for Greece to.
There's also hotspots that were set up now.
But that's why it's important to look at like the sort of transit situation, because it's quite a particular situation, and that changes the legal frameworks that we've seen in Europe thus far. So in terms, maybe you want to talk about this sort of...
Yeah. I mean, I can give you a very sort of hands-on depiction of what is happening in Greece and or on Lesbos and on Samos. I would love to. I don't speak so loud. Is it on?
No, I think you just turned.
Okay. Can you guys hear me? Okay, perfect. So I'm going to be very specific about Samos and Lesbos because that's where I'm based. Basically, you have a very organized structure of boats coming from Turkey, which is incredible to see. Because, for example, once we had also Tsipras coming to Lesbos, and then all the boats stopped, and that was shocking. So it's extremely organized, and then when people come to Greece, it's a little bit more creative, I would say, as an arrival situation. And people arrive anywhere on the island. That depends very much on how heavy the weather is. Some people swim, some people actually take the boats. And when they arrive, they have smartphones, so that's what they take care of the most. And we've been looking into the possibility to provide power stations around the island, because ideally you would have sort of emergency spots, which people who are into hardware, maybe you would want to consider that, because the first thing that you want to load is your phone, and then also the largest Wi-Fi carrier or telco in Greece is actually a German telco. So they've been looking into ways to improve internet around the islands. But the fact is that there is internet. You can get prepaid SIM cards. They're given out by the NGOs already, so please don't reinvent the wheel. But Mercy Corps, for example, does that, and the UN also. And then what happens usually is that people are registered for the first time in hotspots that were recently set up by, I think it's Frontex and the EU together with local authorities, and then you have NGOs that are supporting there, but it's primarily run by EU and Frontex together.
Sorry, the hotspots are also part of the EU relocalization policy. So EU are in different member states of the EU are in discussions to take certain numbers of people from the hotspots. So France has made an agreement to take 30,000, Spain has made an agreement to take 15,000, and they all come from those hotspots.
And what's important to note is that there is no internet in the hotspots. If there is, then it's really bad. But the registration process in Greece is not digitized, and that's something that is unfortunate for all parties involved. Usually then what happens when you're a refugee or an economic migrant, this is super important, because usually they used to send everyone to the refugee camps around the island, and now they've actually started to distinguish, at least on Samos, that the economic migrants stay in the refugee camp and everyone else is directly sent as an asylum seeker to Athens, and then people get lost there, buy fake passports or go to their smuggler and then take the plane to Germany or to Sweden, to countries where they actually want to go. And the economic migrants who are in the refugee camps usually get a permit of 1 month, saying, you have 1 month to stay and then you have to get out of the country. Well, that also changes a lot. I think it has to do with its country of origin. Yeah, it's a status of war in the country that defines if they can be sent back or not. It's also the age factor. If they came alone or with family. I'm not 100% sure, but we can ask the people who are actually, closer to that. But yeah. So yeah, things to think about: connectivity, translation. How do you have someone about you don't know which language she or he speaks? Flexibility of your concepts, because things move so fast. Weatherproof, if it's hardware, that's super important. And people with the NGOs, they don't use so much internet, and so maybe if you want to communicate as an admin with your users, think about SMS services. It's very important.
So if it's okay with Alistair and Camille, maybe we'll transition into the hackathon students' tech projects that concentrate on Lesbos, since we were just on that topic. I can use the mic, I guess. So I pitched the problem of Lesbos, that the aid was very uncoordinated. There are many volunteers and many aid organizations working on the ground, but the efforts are often very confusing, and their direction is not necessarily in the correct place. So Mercy Corps, IRC, Google, a few large aid institutions have offered this service where you can select your location, and then you get to a map, find lodging, and it's all written here. they're going to try and integrate this system for Europe, I guess it's just Europe, with their service info. So you can try and search for a service, but
Service info is for the MENA region, for the Syria crisis.
sorry, yeah. So service info is specifically for the MENA region, Syrian crisis, and then this information center is specifically for the European crisis. So we know that they're trying to merge those two systems. I pitched a challenge to the EPIIC teams to come up with a simpler system that actually got input from the refugees faster. And so you can hear about their projects. Is Sent Refuge able to go first? Do you feel comfortable going there? I can also ask someone else to go first if you like. Okay, great. So each project will come up and demo their results, their solution, and you guys can give a little bit of feedback. Great.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah, introduce yourselves. Oh yeah, introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Ariel Refugee. I'm a sophomore.
I'm John Atkins. I'm a senior studying computer science and economics.
My name is Ricky. I am actually a postbac student at Tufts. I graduated from Millbury College, studying Middle East and Arabic, and I'm doing postbac in computer science here.
I don't do any computer science. So during the hackathon, we decided to work on this project, and basically there was the central database that Danielle just showed. So we used the data from there, as well as finding a lot of other data on the internet, because there isn't any consolidation of shelter, food, medical, and transit services on Lesbos specifically. Then we made a web app that is universal. There's no language, so we didn't have to worry about translation services. And basically, when you click on one of the icons, a list will show up and a map of the places that have this is specifically for shelter, so it has the shelter location, phone number, and we added whether you needed proof required, like proof of registration, to live in this establishment, and then you could click on it and go to the website if they have it, or the Facebook page, and that way they can be connected with these types of resources. And we did that for food and medical as well.
So you could actually look at this on your computer, on your phone. It's mobile responsive. If you go into your phone, type in lesbosapp.herokuapp.com, just the URL up here. You can make this a little bigger. But yeah, it's currently at this very preliminary stage of listing all of the different resources and then putting them on a map. That's as far as we got for the 24 hours that we were allowed for the hackathon. We stayed up all night, and it was a fascinating experience. And John, talk more about the tech.
Sure. So, I mean, we thought it made a lot of sense to have an Android usable app, because that's, I mean, most of the phones that people will be using, hopefully will be, I mean, will, in theory, be Android phones, and we wanted to make it work, especially on Android phones. We, worked with the experience that we had and decided to make a web app that was mobile responsive and would work on any Android phone. And the major issues that we see for the future are, well, it works on, if you want to you can get the mobile view of that, and it is totally responsive and will work on any mobile phone. Major issue is that we're trying to save data, which, like, we can't, locally store things right now, but that is an easy fix. There's certain applications that can do that, transport any web app to that, to an Android app, and that should be usable from there. Other than that, it's a Ruby on Rails backend, and simple.
And one thing that we're hoping to add is an availability for refugees or users of the app to rate the services and say, okay, this shelter actually worked, this place provides food, this medical place doesn't exist anymore, something like that, and also for crowdsourcing. So if there's any information that isn't on the app, they can add it.
I was gonna say, talk more about the crowdsourcing.
Yeah.
But
Well, I guess currently what we did is Ariel, because she didn't have a ton of computer science experience, spent a lot of the hackathon looking up, compiling like what we think is a fantastic database of all of the resources available online. Those are all the resources we could find. I kept being like, can we find some sort of database that we can just grab all the info from, and it just doesn't exist. So we were trying to compile tons of databases. And we got that, but obviously things are fluid, and so we're hoping that it will be easy, and we're integrating like a one-step, two-step process to be able to add locations for these services when refugees find them, or for local providers to supply them as well, to supply their name and their address and their information, and then hopefully it can be verified through a voting process. So hopefully that will mean that this app will continue to live on past what it is right now, which is it only exists with what currently was available.
I think we also had an issue with the address. Finding address is difficult. Finding address was very difficult for us, I guess, for some of the resources, especially the shelter. But yeah, so sometimes the resources the shelter would just say like Scala, and it's hard to find what Scala is. We couldn't get more specific than that, so that was another issue we ran into. But if anyone can give us feedback on how to iterate and make this better, it would be great.
Yeah, or get addresses, because we were running off of trying to find specific, one, we found a lot of maps that had the points on them, and we tried to figure out what the exact coordinates were from that, and the other one figured out, and then the geocoding through the Google Maps API was not perfect. So if you click on anything under the location, it'll send you to, right now it just sends you to the list, but it should send you 2 directions, but it doesn't exactly work because the geocoding isn't perfect.
It's really funny because there's this one restaurant where everyone always meets. It's called Captain's Table, and there's one person in there who's always administering it, and no one knows about it. You only have to Google the Captain's Table to know where all the refugees and the volunteers meet. But it's just
There's no address for the Captain's Table?
Well, I think by now there's an address, but it doesn't say the weird little restaurant Captain's Table is where everyone meets.
Right. So have people on the ground.
Why would refugees use your app?
In order to have kind of a streamlined database of resources that are available without necessarily, if they don't know anybody or they didn't have any group that they came with. I know that there's usually a sense of community among the refugees, so there's a lot of talking, but just in case that isn't enough or they really need something else that's tangible and that isn't just word of mouth, they can get it. That was the general.
Where did you get your idea from?
Sorry?
Where did you get your idea from?
The project was pitched by Danielle.
Yeah, it was pitched by Danielle, and then we used our experience with other apps. It was kind of like a Yelp or Craigslist for refugees is the simple one-sentence startup pitch.
So it's in direct response to refugees.
It was in direct
Yeah.
response.
And they're we have this problem.
Yeah.
We can't find this.
Yeah.
We have this problem with them.
Yeah, I worked with Paula and Kavita and tech refugees in the community for 3 months, and we went through what all of the large organizations were doing on the ground so far. We reviewed what Paula needed on the ground. We had conversations about it for a long time. And then I pitched this to the students for 5 minutes, said food, water, shelter, most important things, lack of coordination, solve it, and they came up with it.
How are we implementing this?
That's what we're talking about.
In what sense? What do you mean?
As in, how
As in a tech sense, or as in?
are we going to get this disseminated into the public? How are we going to get people to use it? How
Well,
are we
it's
going to go through
public.
organizations?
Well,
Yeah.
I have a lovely team on the ground who would be super happy to use this, and I can, pass this on to Mercy Corps. And to be honest, I would be more grassroots about things. I don't know if anyone here works at Google, but Google has been really annoying, to be honest, because there's so many cool things happening in the ecosystem, and either they go and replicate or they just don't care because they're too big. And then they used to go for the very large NGOs, which I understand from a credibility point of view. But if you have so much innovation happening in your tech company, then I find that very difficult. about. So if you guys are close to Google, maybe you can just verbally tell them that. I think it will make a difference though, right? So I'm not pro going up to Google and saying, can we maybe use your channels? That hasn't worked with Accenture either, that, you know, all these big marketing channels that we think are usable to push stuff out there, not so much.
Just ask one quick question about this. So technology is great, but paper still exists. Why don't you just put up signs?
They do have, so with Refugee Info, they do have signs. We don't have a budget, as I understand, at the moment.
It doesn't, in my experience, it doesn't cost a lot of money to write it on a piece of paper and put it on signs. So I don't know what big budget you would need for something that simple.
Credibility, right? You see something written on a scrap of paper, who's going to walk by and read it?
I mean, you
Literally,
want to say
literally every refugee that knows how to read.
As in, if it's not printed out, would you actually
But
trust it? If it's handwritten?
To be honest, that's what grassroots means, no? Like, you write it on a piece of paper, you bring it down to the island, and you make 6 people talk about it.
I
And
very
that's
much so
exactly
agree with
what I
the
would do.
grassroots approach, by the way, because if you get this spread by word of mouth and it starts proliferating, that's the only useful way of spreading, right? And top-down imposition won't work. I'm just curious as to what the entry point is.
Yeah, so the thing is, when I spoke to Ariel when they were doing this, it's Ariel, right? When they were doing the project, and then I got in touch with a girl who I know who's an asylum seeker in France who went through over the sea, that route, etc. And I said to her, like, how did you get your information? And she said, oh, through this guy who had international SIM, and then he had a network everywhere. And then I said, okay, so how did you choose like the sources of information that you want to use? She was like, oh, well, he gave me access to these groups on Facebook. So they're closed groups. She was added by a friend, and then on those Facebook groups, which are in Arabic, I gave you the links. And she chose the apps that were shared on there and the sources of information that were shared on there by other Syrians that she knew. And even within the Syrian groups, there are like divides between, you know, like where you're from, if you're Homzi, or if you're from Damascus, or if you're from Dara, or like whatever. And so like all of those, in terms of like disseminating a service, I mean, I think those are really interesting issues to explore. And when you're talking about grassroots, it's that, you know, it's like, you know, coming from their point of view and looking at what their networks are to be able to like have a strategy for dissemination.
And usually it goes really fast to make that go viral. I have the domain supportlesbos.com. I bought that a while ago, and there's nothing on there, and I would like to make it a donation to you guys if you would want to use it as the first.
That would be incredible. Well, there are also other teams that worked on similar things.
I was gonna actually interject. No, it's fine. I was gonna actually interject and say that I wasn't expecting so many teams to pick up this project when I pitched it. If I could have given different pitches, but we didn't. So we have a few different solutions, but at the same time, I think that all of these solutions are scalable if the effort was put into it. Yes. And could be used in different circumstances, so it's somewhat flexible in that regard. But
and this is something, I mean, we have a partnership with Rocket Internet for the scalability of stuff, which is directly linked to go-to-market strategy, right? So, I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but it's really how do you set up the channels usually, how do you set up the social media of it, and you focus on a specific user, and it's not about the user himself, it's more about the mechanisms that are usually then triggered, you know, in order to make this happen. So from a methodological point of view, we can also give you support.
Great. And maybe we'll move on to the next project and we can take more questions because they'll probably be on the same theme.
All right, thank you guys.
Thank you. Send Refugee.
Yeah.
And yeah, just say your name and what school you're from. And if anyone needs to go to another breakout session or attend any other part of the symposium at any point in time, like I said, don't feel shy. You're welcome to go and come as you please throughout the day.
This isn't it.
They're connected. They will.
Because I'm just bringing people down. So I don't.
Hello? Okay, so we're ready to get started here. My name's Amin. This is Darian, Ella, Mayuri, and Whitney. And we built Centrifuge. So Centrifuge is an SMS-based solution for the refugee crisis in Greece, where we have hundreds of thousands of refugees going through and no efficient way to communicate their needs for water, food, and shelter. So basically our solution is very simple. We have this number. Right now it's US-based, but when we actually deploy it, we need to get a Greek number. And you just text a text message to it, and if it contains the word water, food, or shelter, and we can replace it with the equivalents in Greek, then we store your location in our database. And we also inform our volunteers. So we'll walk you through the pieces of this. So,
Hi. So we had a couple different pieces. We wanted the entire app from the point of view for the refugee to be really simple. So as far as they can see, they just have a hotline that they can text into. For us, one of the most important pieces that we wanted to focus on was having a really high load. So our system is actually distributed. So when you text into the hotline, what happens is that it distributes load right now between 3 servers because we didn't want to build more than that in the 24 hours. But so you text in, it takes your location, and assuming that you have a text of the type like containing food, water, or shelter, we store that in our database and we translate your zip code to your location. And so Darian actually built the Android app for the other side of it. So the other part is that where volunteers can actually sign up to use our app. So what happens here is that you sign up, and you sign up with your phone number, which contains an area code. So we extract your location from there, and we store that in our database. Sorry. Oh, yeah, a volunteer. So for a given volunteer, we extract your location, and we store that in our database too. So what happens is that when a person sends in a text message, what we're looking for is to see if there are any volunteers within their area, which we can extract by seeing if their zip codes match. And if we're both in our database, we ping all the volunteers within the area to be like, hello, there's a person in the area who needs food, can you help them with that? And one of the volunteers can actually claim the refugee and say, oh, I can help them, and they get connected and the refugee's phone number is sent. And the other part that Whitney and Ella worked on was the actual website, which helps us visualize where most of the refugee pings happen, so the actual government can see, oh, look, these are the areas that are most in trouble, these are the areas which have people who need a lot of help, but very few volunteers who are willing to claim them. So we visualize that to make the infrastructure stronger. Yeah. Okay, so these are the technologies we actually used. I guess it looks a little complicated up there. We basically send an SMS and distribute the system, store the information, and we have data visualization on our website. So this is a little bit more about our load balancing stuff, which I guess doesn't, it's just enough so that when the master receives all the texts, it balances it relatively evenly between a variable number of servers. Yeah, so the part that I guess I didn't really talk about, when a volunteer, when a request is actually accepted,
by his app, you get removed from the queue, so all the other volunteers who signed up are saying, okay, this person has been claimed.
I'll talk about the Android application quickly. So the Android application does not push in requests, it pulls requests. It is a volunteer app, as Mayuri said. So the application is meant to be incredibly simple and easy to use. When a volunteer first downloads the app, they get this screen up top. They register the service by hitting the button, and it sends up an SMS. It sends up their number, Firebase, in which case we go about pairing it using the area codes. Then from there, when they want to pull down a request, they get a request, and they can either call, or they can just send it away if they're done with it, getting all the information they need for that one person. Then when the request is complete, it shows that. It will pull down more at arbitrary amounts of time.
Okay, so what Whitney and I work on is a simple web page that visualizes where the demand is coming from. So this is just basically using HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and the Google Map API. And we pull from the data that is stored in Firebase and plot where the demands are coming from on the Google Map.
Yeah, we chose to use a heat map so that you can see where the areas that need the most help are. They are the ones that have the reddish kind of tint in it, and so as it fades out, it becomes more like a light blue color. So here's our website. Let's go back up to the top. Yeah, this is the opening. You can go to the about, and it just tells you about the website. You can scroll through this. It tells you how to use the service, and you can go to the map, and you can choose between food, water, and shelter. So if we click on food, you can see that the map visualization changes based on food, changes based on water, and then finally shelter. I want to take a look at that. Yeah, and that is what we built.
Just a quick question. Having worked most closely with UNHCR protection units in Zapadi refugee camp, how does the vetting process work for those who sign up as volunteers? Because this could present a huge protection risk from the international organization perspective for who you are having interacted with the refugee.
We didn't design a vetting process.
That's good. That's a good answer. So it's something to think about moving forward.
What? A vetting process for the volunteers.
What is vetting?
If they're
to make sure they're not a creep. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not a trafficker or a smuggler or whatever.
So there's this thing Cartero. Did you check it out already? It's guys who were open sourcing maps, and that was built for building purposes, and then people started putting refugee camps everywhere and taking pictures from locations where you really stay. They have 800,000 users a week from Iraq. It's really crazy this is going on, but they have a lot of info that you would want for your map as well. I can bring you in contact with the CEO. With the registration of volunteers, there's a local service that they've been wanting to introduce, at least in Greece, and they keep shifting the deadline to the back because they don't know which which parameters to use for that.
And sorry, not to interrupt, but just in general with the questions, the students were presented with this challenge and they didn't think of every single issue they may encounter or a complication. So this session is serving as a space to ask those. So excellent question. And then if people in the room have suggestions as to where you can find this data, then the conversation can be go back. Okay, if you had this data, what would you do to integrate it into your system? So next question. Paula, and then Alexander, and
so question one is the code going to be on GitHub? Is it open source? Awesome. Thing two is that there's a couple of people who I know in Greece who want to build something like that for a completely different user group. And it would be awesome if they can use the code because it's basically exactly the same structure.
The code is all available on GitHub right now. It's up
Okay.
and available, and if it's a similar use case, it should be very easy to pull it down, deploy it for other uses.
I'm going to connect you with these guys.
Okay, that'd be great.
So this is only available if you've got Wi-Fi?
The SMS-based interface is available if you have an SMS-capable phone. So if you're a refugee, you don't need Wi-Fi. You just text in the number. And all the rest of the stuff depends on Wi-Fi. So if you're a volunteer, your mobile app only works if you have access to Wi-Fi or data. If you're trying to go to the website and see the visualization, you have to have Wi-Fi or data to see the website. But if you are the refugee who's texting in a need for water, food, or shelter, all you need to know is our hotline number and a phone that is capable of sending an SMS.
With no cost?
Right now, our number is a US phone number, so no. But if we were able to set this up as a hotline in Greece that is a toll-free number, then yes, with no cost.
So you'd rely on someone giving you a toll-free number?
The idea is that yes, if we deployed this in
But
Greece.
that's a fantastic entryway to start talking to telco.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
The other question was, okay, so it was based on zip code recognition. So are you sure that exists? Like, what's the system in Greece? Is there a similar system of recognition?
So what we have right now is zip code recognition that is actually for Greece. So whenever we get an incoming text message, we look at the 3 or 4 digits after the +30, and those segment Greece into 250 areas. So it gives us an approximate location for the need, which is enough for our visualization purposes, and it's enough for us to be able to tell a volunteer who is within relatively the same area. It doesn't give away the refugee's exact location. We don't currently have a good way to do that.
So there's a library called What 3 Words. That's an alternative to GPS systems. So it uses a 3-word interface to identify exactly what spot you are within 10 meters. Look into it. What 3 words? So instead of being, some noxious coordinate like 17.66310 latitude X, it'll just say boy, tall, weird, and it'll geolocate exactly the spot that you're into. That's brilliant stuff. They're an amazing company.
They're incredible.
And they're free. So jump on that.
So we've seen, I think, 2 very great innovative solutions to problems that already exist. Now I have the same concern for this project as I did with the previous one, and that's how are you what you're gonna want to do is partner with another NGO and get it endorsed, because it's the same issue of why would the refugees trust using this app if they don't know the people behind it. So whether that's it's the same issue of you want to first of all ensure that the data is treated confidentially and make sure that they're anonymous, even though there doesn't seem to be a registration process involved, but still make sure that the users know that their information is not going to be sold to third parties. And one way of doing that would be to partner with, doesn't need to be a big international NGO, but someone that
somebody
they
who's
can
working
trust.
directly with them.
And if it's
It's really just about using the ecosystem, right? So it's offline and online communications. Sort of one is Facebook groups and online, and the other one is what we call slow coding, is like going up to people. But I mean, for example, with flyers that you can use to bring them into the refugee camps, and this can directly interlink also with the map of support. So you would have different links on a flyer, or you could have a radio station, for example. This is something that works quite well also in Greece and in Turkey, where info is communicated also in Arabic more. So there's different ways, but it's really about the strategy.
And just as a note, we're not judging, or we're not judges. We're not trying, the comments and the questions that we have are because we actually want to understand. We want to get at the root understanding of what you're doing so that we can better frame how we're thinking about it. None of this is to point out failings or shortcomings in anything you're doing. You did this in 24 freaking hours. Right? None of us are coming in with the impression that you have a fully fledged, business plan, a model, a partnership strategy, and all that shit. We're not doing that. So
and
please
they haven't changed
don't.
refugee info.
Pardon me?
refugee info actually was built by one guy, and also in a pretty short period of time. So don't be mistaken and think that they are working like constantly to improve it. So
I mean, so every single project here needs a couple of things. One of those things is money, because seeding is usually difficult to do without money, right? So like finding a funding source is finding a funding partner, finding an endorsement from some sort of legitimate, credible organization to put this into proliferation. Like that's obviously the first step, right? I don't have strong recommendations or suggestions around that because the VCs that I know aren't really into helping the world
exactly.
so much. So I think that would be a good topic to look into. Like, how can we get these damn things funded? How can we get a great structure around it? How can we make sure that the great insights that were generated for this and the enormous amount of effort and work and time that you guys students put into this isn't wasted, right? I'd really like things to survive past the damn weekend, because most hackathons kind of die out after the 24 hours and don't get picked up. So it's this funding pathway, it's this route towards.
But this is where impact bonds are really important. So two good ways to do this is one is to show that your impact is increasing 25% month-over-month growth. That's what we actually say about the projects that we support. That the user numbers grow, or the deliveries of the first aid service, or you actually you're able to use data to show the social profit that you're generating for other people, and that is something that's more tangible than to just say, I don't know, we're just developing something cool here.
No, but getting foot in the door really matters, because how are they going to live in the United States? How are they going to get this project into Lesbos without a partner like, for example, you and your organization disseminating and putting things through?
Well,
and having.
That's my job, not theirs.
Fair enough.
Just out of curiosity, how much did it cost to set this up, like the hotline, the 3 servers, and
So,
running, just to get an idea?
So right now, with the number that we have, right now we pay a monthly cost of $1 just to maintain the number. We pay per SMS that we receive.
You're not using Folio, are you?
We are.
Okay.
So we're paying per SMS that we receive something like less than 1 cent, 3/4 cent, I think. But that's with this number. I don't know how it will be increased.
Seriously, one email to Folio from our organization, and you're not paying for it. Like, it's that easy.
Yeah.
And so I'm talking about huge sums, like thousands.
Well, that's just for the SMS side of things. For the servers, we are currently running 4 different servers, which are going to total with just 4 servers, some $80 a month.
But that's with no bandwidth and that's with no RAM.
Right.
So if there is load, it can go up to like $5,000 a month, depending on the kind of. I mean, if we're talking about 800,000 people a week getting into the platform, you're looking at 30 grand.
So that's going to be where the actual costs are.
I guess this is just a suggestion for the future. I think your idea is great. I think it's a really cool, innovative idea. But for the future, maybe having some sort of way for troubleshooting. So for example, location is really difficult to get really accurate. Even big companies like Uber, like when I call an Uber, sometimes the driver can't find me and it takes a phone call in order for me to describe my area for someone to find me. And so I see that maybe sometimes troubleshooting may be something that you would need to build into the application. But otherwise I think it's great. And also with language, because I know maybe the average volunteer won't be able to speak Arabic. And so maybe I know you would like to keep it as simple as possible, but for the victim or the refugee who's arriving on the island, to specify whether they know English and see whether any volunteers would be able to communicate in the same language. Because no matter like how kind of beginner their levels might be, it just might be easier.
And then, response or?
I mean, yeah, that can be part of the selection process for the volunteers. It would be great if they could speak Arabic. For the whole thing, we don't actually currently tell the volunteer, or we don't even attempt to tell them exactly where the person is. We attempt to match the refugee who texts in with a volunteer who is hopefully within the same area. And then we connect them by actually giving the refugee's number to the volunteer so that they can call and have an actual conversation so that they can find each other. And this also ties back to the vetting thing. If the refugee talking to the volunteer somehow doesn't trust him, then they don't need to meet. But, yeah.
One more question, and then we have 3 more presentations, so we're going to get rolling.
I just wanted to, because there's refugees arriving in Greece who have worked in NGOs also along the way, and what we're trying to do is to get them sort of on board, and what would be awesome is to have a Skype hotline of support where you have a sort of customer service, right? And then you can just call them up, the people who have troubleshooted, and you can ask them where they are, and this would also be for us an excellent way to ask for more laptops because
Good morning. Hi everyone. My name is Octave Muiru. I'm an undergrad student in computer engineering at Wentworth Institute of Technology. At the EPIIC, I was working with Caroline, but unfortunately she was not able to get here, but we worked together on the presentation. So we were both not, I had a little bit of coding experience, but she didn't have, so what we focused on was more on the design side of things, so we don't really have the application build or a prototype. But basically, I'll take you through the presentation real quickly. So these are kind of the minor stats where there's a lot of people affected by this crisis in Syria. So about like 11 million people. There's a lot of families that are struggling. And on the long term with things, children will really get affected with malnutrition and all sorts of problems. So the problem we're trying to solve is getting the refugee input, where all the organizations here try to just suggest solution to the refugees, and what we wanted to think about is if we can, there's any way to give a voice to the actual refugees. Let's see. So we kind of came up with 3 solutions. First solution was actually just like kind of 2 solutions. One would be like some type of Android app where you can get information from both the actual refugees and the volunteers, and which will also can find a way to connect them as an SMS app as well. And all the data that would be submitted through those apps would get fed into a website and that website will be like a dashboard for different organizations that are trying to help those refugees in ways of communicating those data. So take you through the third prototype that we built. So this is how it would look like. First of all, one of the challenges is kind of language. How do you translate all this into different languages? Like Farsi, I think that's what the Syrian uses, Arabic, and I assumed English, maybe French also. So basically, once a refugee logs in, they just get a map, and the green dots on the map are what's available in that area, and the red dots is we would get your location, and once you press the red dot, that would submit that that's the need, that's what you need at that location. So basically, if you need food or you just, or say like actually shelter, you press the first red all the way on the right, and that would specify to send that data to a database where the organization can see that in that area shelter is needed. If, say, 1,000 people are using this, that will indicate that, oh, this is a huge need in that area. And then you just report it, and then this is where the volunteer can log in the app, and they can notice that the food is like in area. The green on the refugee, on the volunteer would see that those are missions that have been accepted. The red would be the mission that still needed to be accepted. Click on it, and they can accept the mission or deny the mission. And then we'll see that confirmed. We will need to find a way to actually track this. Say, notify the refugees, oh, somebody's working on this. Find a way to communicate back to them. Yeah, and then moving on. Future stuff. To the website. So basically, we're thinking of making like a dashboard. I would say whatever, because there was a lot of organizations that are working on trying to help the refugees. So we wanted to give them like an actual dashboard that can give them an area where, say, like top 3 current needs, and they can either decide to take those missions and then specify what they need and specify what they're gonna do, and other organizations, if there's anything also they can pitch in and do. List views, can do some type of analytics on the different data. And we also wanted to not only think of Syrian refugees, we wanted, like in a global setting of refugees in general. We thought SMS would be more of a general solution, since Syrians have smartphones, but not everyone has access to a smartphone. So the SMS app would solve a global solution. So this is what would potentially look like, but this is just one screen. But it's yeah, it would be very easy to do registration. Challenge is getting the location, but what 3 words probably might help solve that. This would be no problem. This would be, we're thinking of using something called Django, built-in Django Rapid SMS, which is a Django-based framework. But yeah, and that's pretty much it. Thank you. Any questions?
Sorry.
So awesome job. I think it's great. I think what's important is the level of trust that you include when it's about who assesses the information. An NGO, for example, has a very close structure of administration, and I think it makes sense to think about giving this to specific NGOs who would want to use this as an internal feedback system, and to leave it up to the users, so the NGOs, if they would like to include more feedback, so maybe they can open more channels of feedback on what is needed, because they only want to trust specific people with it, and that's how I see it. This could develop quite quickly, and also how often do you refresh the data? So how long is a request up, and when it's in progress, how is it different? Because I understand you have green and red, right?
Yeah.
And also, if someone is waiting for that to be, yeah. So.
Thinking of implementing some type of notification to the refugee, so that they know what's going on, instead of just seeing the green button or red. But yeah. Yeah.
Hi, not really a question. My name is Chris. I was one of the organizers of EPIIC. So I'm listening to the feedback that you guys are saying about implementation, actualizing projects, increasing social impact. So I still welcome all those comments, and we can also talk like after this 1 hour session. But if you have ideas on like how to help, like awesome projects like these become actuality or like incubate them to become more successful, like I'm listening. I think I just wanted to cut that out.
Either one.
I just had a brilliant brainstorm in my head at least on this idea of trust and how do we get people to know who to trust, who to listen to. People listen to their families, and we can't help these people coming across the border because of our fun international legal system and politics and whatnot. But we know where their families are. Their families are still in these awful areas in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and whatnot. But there are organizations there that are working. So if you were to provide the information of the URLs, the websites, the location, to the family members there, disseminate the information there, and then the family members pass it on, then we take away the problem of refugees showing up on the shores of a foreign land, not knowing who to trust, what to do, because they'll have a message from their family who they trust saying, the UN organization or the NGO that's operating in Syria or wherever gave us this information, therefore it's trustworthy, go here. So that could be one place to get around this knowledge trust issue, another place to kind of drop the information and get it to people through a trustworthy network.
Yeah.
That's all I had.
No, the trust is definitely important. That was also my previous point. But now another challenge, and I was just talking to Mike about it, is information. How do you centralize information? Like you have, and that was like dozens of NGOs working, probably with similar tools to provide similar services, like the app we saw, the SMS service we saw before that. But if you're using a dozen different apps to do the same thing, it's just going to cause more confusion to the situation. So what we had initially presented there was this one website, refugeeinfo.eu, where all the NGOs were providing the information. And so if there's a way to reconcile all these apps and all these databases into one centralized system, which would require, of course, partnering up with all the local NGOs, international NGOs on the ground, that would be, I think, much more helpful to the UN10 community. So
it's true, but Paula just said that. Sorry.
Yeah, and Paula, maybe you want to answer to that.
No, she just said that it's one guy. Don't assume that it's like always being updated.
Yeah.
Because it isn't.
Yeah.
And also, it's like it's losing its relevance as well. So that it's always there are different things happening in Lesbos, and like Paula said earlier, a system like that needs to be flexible.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a system like that, but I mean, I'm not saying that that's the one we should use, but we need to come up with a way to centralize that information. And it's difficult because a lot of the information maybe NGOs don't want to necessarily share because it's confidential, but you need to find a way to do that.
I have a response to that. How many more teams do we have?
Well, I just wanted to say one thing. We have 2 more presentations, and the second part of this session will focus on trusted networks and building them. I think we're also assuming that information is safe with large aid organizations, which obviously isn't true. So offline communities and online communities, it's not necessarily like, okay, if I want to like go through like the UN or the UNHCR or IRC, like then I'm safe. Like that is not true. So we're gonna debate that. We're gonna debate that a little bit later.
Yeah.
Some very nasty people are also on Facebook, and they know exactly where to look for what's happening, who's going where.
So.
But I think we should table our discussions on these sorts of things until after the demos.
Are there any other questions or final thoughts for the Lesbos project portion of this? Yes, one more question.
Oh, yes.
I don't know so much about the technology, but I really like the outlet. I don't know, probably you have seen similar projects before and so on, but it was very simple for me. And I think a person who's under stress and very confused, you don't have so many things to choose. I think this is the thing. You keep it very simple, so you really push the button and it happens. Yeah, so I really like it.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Where do we plug this back into for the screen? Clearly, I'm tech savvy.
Watch me not be able to figure any of this out.
Well, anyway, I can explain a little, or give a brief transition as we're figuring this out. So Camille and I work at the Open Agriculture Initiative at MIT, so this isn't necessarily an app or a solution for any current issues, but since we have people here interested in education, we have in bettering education for people in transit, asylum seekers, refugees, and it also has to do with humanitarian aid because eventually it could be considered food security tools. But basically, we will give you our vision for how we could use closed-controlled environment agriculture, hydroponic systems that basically have a bunch of sensors in them, and it would essentially give, and it's all open source material, so it would provide. I have it here.
Okay, sorry, I kind of missed what that intro was, but I'll redo an intro. Okay, thanks. Hi, I'm Camille Richmond. I'm a mechanical engineer at the Open Agriculture Initiative at the MIT Media Lab. That is the MIT Media Lab, and that purple glowing is one of our farms. You can see it from Boston. It's pretty cool. Not right now. We're changing. Never mind. Okay. So what the Open Agriculture Initiative does is design and open source controlled environment agriculture tech platforms. So first, what is controlled environment agriculture? It is pretty much farming in a box. So can you plop down boxes anywhere in the world and feed people? And can you do it in, what was that?
Simple drip irrigation systems.
Hydroponics and aeroponics, you can do drip irrigation, you can do soil in it if you want, but the idea is controlled environment. So this is going to be more and more relevant as our populations increase, as our climate is changing, and our food production systems are just, they're going to have to change. And this is the method that a lot of people are looking towards, controlled environment ag. So it's kind of like, I think of it as treating your food the way you want to be treated. We spend a lot of our time indoors in controlled environments, and so it's kind of a very protected way to grow your food. So we're looking at these platforms in 3 scales. These are the 2 larger scales we're looking at. This is actually that farm from the purple glow that you saw, and that is called the food server. That's about the size of a shipping container. And then this is what we call the food data center, which would be the same thing, but in a warehouse scale. And so, yeah, thanks. So what's special about our vision for this is that these are farms outfitted with sensors and actuation mechanisms that can control the environment according to a climate recipe that you create or that you download from elsewhere and tweak. And what's cool about being able to do this, what makes this a cool tool, is that climate affects the expression of your plant. So a lot of information is stored in the plant's genetics, of course, but a lot of the expression is about the environment. So flavor, yield, texture, color, all of these things are things that a plant expresses due to its environment. So there are a lot of cool high-tech things you can do, changing flavor, whatever, changing nutrient concentrations. So there are a lot of ways you can manipulate your crops with this tech. And so we want to create an open source network of people using these tools and creating the data about plant expression due to different climate recipes so that we can learn about plants and provide nutrition and food access better in the world. And so one of our vessels of getting this out there is a smaller scale. You can't exactly put shipping container or warehouse anywhere yet. So we've gone to these desktop versions to build awareness and to put into schools right now. So we have pilot programs in schools. And it's the same thing. Obviously the actuators are different than the larger systems, but the idea is that what's transferable between these systems is that climate recipe. So kids can be designing climates and testing climates and getting them verified through this network and know they can make a difference if there's a food server in Lesbos and they can create a climate recipe that can help people there. Yeah?
So we put these food computers in 6 local schools in Boston with a wide range of students. And just from an education perspective, it was incredible to see how the students reacted to the food computers. The fact that they had control over their food growing and they understood exactly what it took, hardware, software, and the biology behind it, the plant biology behind it, in order to get their nutrition. And a lot of the technology that should be provided to refugees should be making them more independent, not dependent on structures. So the idea behind providing refugees or even asylum seekers access to high-tech food, and also we should mention that you could build solar-powered food computers that are much lower tech versions of this, just as an education tool or just to bring people into an open source community. And so we, as I mentioned in the beginning, this isn't necessarily a direct solution for right now, but for education purposes and for a ton of other reasons, including nutrition, which may become more apparent in the near future, it would be important to provide refugees or kids that are in these situations with the same tools we're providing the kids with in Boston, so that they're included in these open source communities. They actually might have the chance to have access to adequate nutrition, and it's not just a final solution. We're not telling you that the food computer will provide food security for the entire island of Lesbos, but what we're telling you is that if for some reason there are safe systems and safe communities set up for these people in transit and they have access to this, you don't know exactly how that will affect them, but what I can tell you is that they will probably be much more inspired, better off, just like the kids that we've shown it to so far, because they are learning about engineering, they're learning about nutrition, and just the fact that it is open source, like I keep repeating that, but it's important because there's already like big organizations around the world that already try to control this by patenting and owning climates. So if you don't, and also a lot of people in the world are subject to big food systems where they're not even getting adequate nutrition, or there's like problems in their food sources that they're literally being like stunted and not poisoned, but stunted by their food access. So if you put these tools, the food computer is an educational tool around, you might be inspiring like people and kids in that community who you think have less of a chance of being independent in the future because of their circumstances. You might be providing them a chance to have adequate nutrition or learn how to be engineers, like Camille.
Yeah, so every location where any of these systems might be dropped is going to have a different set of challenges to engineer around. So a lot of what we're trying to inspire with our platforms is to be very simple and modifiable, because everyone's going to need to be able to modify their system for their geographical needs, for the cultural dietary needs. And so we hope to create this network around the world of people with these tools, and instead of sending food itself all across the globe, which is the highest energy, the highest amount of energy of your food is the transportation it took, and in that transportation, all the nutrition is slowly going away. So this is kind of our vision for what the new map of food might look like. Instead of actual lines of food, beacons of food computers sending out climate recipes, so exporting the knowledge to create your own food. And I think the coolest thing about this is that this is trying to democratize climate. If you have access to any climate, say you have the climate recipe for Mexico and the best strawberries come from Mexico, you have the power to create Mexican climate in your box and grow the same amazing strawberries. Yeah.
So, I don't know, I guess final thoughts are that it is a wonderful education tool, and I don't know if any of the students over here have any questions about the education parts of it, but yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
I have a question. What are the inputs that are needed to run these banks? So you mentioned solar energy, so can you speak to that?
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, it could be solar. Right now it's not, but it could be. And then other inputs are water, seeds, fertilizer, pH balancing solutions, and right now we provide the schools with chemical fertilizer. We have done compost tea fertilizer. So all of these points are points that are modifiable for your needs, you know. So here we're trying to exactly understand the inputs and outputs to our farm, so we're using chemical fertilizer. If that's not what you're really concerned about, put compost tea in, or your own solution for any of those points.
So, I think I love the idea, and I think that its application to just refugees is so limited. This is something that should be all over the United States, and right, it should be everywhere, because even here we have these food deserts. So
that's the main goal that I enforce this issue. So.
Oh, well, okay.
Yeah, so this is not designed for refugees, but Danielle has been working with this, and she's such a humanitarian, and she really cares about this issue and sees the possibilities. So
but I just want to put one devil's advocate point, and it goes back to something that was said earlier this morning about how refugee camps, we want to be careful about making them permanent institutions. Do you think there's any worry about putting something like this into a refugee camp, which then is almost like, it's something like saying, we can keep going, we can keep this camp going, you can be here for generations to come? Could it take away the urgency of saying this is only temporary and we're going to move you someplace else?
Yeah. So I'm going to let Paula answer after me, because I know she totally has an opinion, and I thought of this as well, and I think that's just a poor excuse for not providing the means to education and the pathways, because that's just saying like, oh, they're going to totally want to stay here, not with their family, not in a better situation. I just don't think that's like how people think. I think that it would be inspiring, and they would want to keep going. I don't see like a food computer as necessarily a permanent structure. Maybe a food server, but then you're talking food security. So you would have to feel that situation out. I think it's wise not to want these situations to be completely permanent. But the fact of the matter is that there's only going to be more refugees, and then climate change is going to happen, and then there's going to be more and more refugees, and then you're going to see these situations become more and more permanent. So it's a balancing act, probably. I don't know, Paula, do you have anything to add?
So yeah, awesome answer. And two things. One is that it's mobile education, which is awesome. So if you teach people to have themselves, and they can replicate this, they can actually live wherever they want, and then it's not about integrating people anywhere anymore. Sort of like you're stuck here or you have to go there, but then you can become an entrepreneur even when it comes to your own nutrition, which is excellent. And the second thing that I wanted to note is that, for example, in Germany, we have a lot of land that's not being used because everyone's moving into the cities, and this is a way of creating a new and very effective ecosystem that is completely based on the needs of the people who live in it. And it breaks my heart to ride around Greece on these these lands that are currently not usable, also because the legal structure is difficult at the moment to buy land, and as soon, I think, as we untrigger that and we get investors into the country, and then we have proposals like these where you can actually also set up infrastructures that are maybe indoors, maybe a little bit outdoors for recreational opportunities linked to education, that would just be magnificent, and I think we're not too far away from that. So thanks.
I also want to add, like, it's quite hard to understand what you're talking about, first of all, because it's quite technical. And I'm sure you have like a baby or child-friendly version, which would, help probably the non-techie people amongst us understand it more. But I'm just thinking it's a really great solution, for example, in places where they're not refugee camps, but refugee settlements. So where the government of Tanzania, for example, or Uganda had refugee settlements where they give a piece of land to refugees, and the refugees can stay there and basically work their land and create their own food and sell food on the Ugandan market. So I think that would have a really good sort of impact in those kinds of refugee situations. But I was wondering, in that case, like, how would you sort of plain English the technology? Or, I'm sure you've thought about that quite a lot, but it's, and also there are also communities that have done their kind of farming in such a traditional way for such a long time. They're used to dealing with like locusts or like diseases, or in a way that they're taught to be resilient and to accept that, and then to not be hungry for like a year, and etc. So like, have you thought about educating people who may not be used to that kind of technology or this way of working?
Yeah, and I think that's really for anywhere. Farming is usually across generations of family. Will have, generations of farmers in their line, and that knowledge is passed through the family. And now, kids aren't as interested in becoming farmers. Everyone's moving to the cities. And most people my age don't garden anymore. That kind of survival skill doesn't exist. So it's going to be everywhere, I think. And that's especially why we've made the smaller scale of the food computer to kind of be a preemptive training, exposure. And it's also going to be on the consumer side, because people see this and they're like, lab-grown food? I don't know. Like when I'm giving a tour, especially if it's like a politician and their security guards are with them, I'm like, here, try this lettuce. And then the security guards, and then I'm like, I taste it, I'm okay. Then they eat the lettuce, So I think consumers and farmers, which is why in schools, even if you're not going to grow up to be a farmer, you're going to grow up to be a consumer no matter what. So if you're exposed to it in school and know, oh yeah, I grew things in food computer in school, that's normal. But then I guess I failed in my duty to make it really simple. It's not a very complex system. It is, we're using soilless farming methods, aeroponics and hydroponics, which means that roots are either suspended in a nutrient water or roots are suspended in air and get a nutrient mist. And this actually saves a lot of water and lets you grow food 3 to 4 times faster, and gives you a ton of control over yield, flavor, all of these things, nutritional density.
Yeah. And also about the cultural sensitivity part, I think that it'll become increasingly important to look to alternative ways to educate people on agriculture, or means by which they can achieve nutrition and safe nutrition when our climates become they change, and there's spaces that have droughts, and all of these, depending on the cultural sensitivity, depending on the geographic region, you could probably customize your lesson for those people to say, like, okay, we understand this is how you've done it in the past, this is your current situation, this is what your outdoor climate looks like, this is what your soil looks like, this is the food you're getting right now, here's a new solution, like, here are the tools if you would like to try and change it. I know you had a question?
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask, because what the humanitarian implications of this could be, because when I worked for the World Food Program in Niger, I remember one of the main challenges was how to respond to this recurrent food crisis, and one of the periods of the year when it was most difficult was during the lean season, where farmers weren't able to grow their own food, so they were relying almost exclusively on food aid. And so, using would you be able to design like a model to allow these farmers to extend their growing period, so that they would be able to grow during, like you mentioned, droughts?
Right.
And that's my first question. My second question is, how expensive would it be to set up a model like this, and would you be able to implement it on a large scale?
So,
and besides the cultural.
So these are 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, growing systems that grow 2 to 3 times faster and save up to 98%, of water than compared to traditional farming. So it would be very expensive right now to throw a food server there. Also, I'm not going to look you in the eye and say that would feed everyone, because and also part of our research, like this is Media Lab, so. It's research. I also think there's a lot of like products, and Camille can contribute to this too, on the market that are hydroponic systems or aeroponic systems that claim to be better, and we don't really have the data on that yet. We don't have the results on that yet. So that's an ongoing process. If we decide that it's like the most economical and also the most environmentally friendly way to provide food for people in those regions, then our goal is to secure funding and implement those projects.
More about like the data being open source. So I'm just thinking in like a really horrible person's point of view. If you've got like, that the farmer down the road makes really good strawberries or makes really good wine, for example, can you basically find a climate recipe for his good wine or her good wine, and basically use it on a much larger scale, making really good wine on a much larger scale, and then basically squashing the market of that small farmer?
You could. I mean,
because
then it's on what open source networks have historically triggered is entrepreneurship, because now you're opening the knowledge base of something that is really powerful. And to me, as a person developing such a network, that would be really exciting for me to see people making businesses off of it and actually using it. But then getting into the competition, maybe regionally there will have to be different structures based on the economies or the type of economy. But to the open source thing, we're open source, but if you used a default climate recipe, tweaked it to make the best wine, you don't have to share that. You can keep it to yourself. You developed it on an open source platform, but you didn't upload your recipe, and that's fine. Like, I use open source 3D model websites like Thingiverse, GrabCAD. I download from it. Unfortunately, I don't upload to it as much as I would like to, Okay,
so then you can protect your climate recipe from being...
Just don't share it.
So
yeah.
Not sharing it.
Yeah. Ideally, we create a network of users that are willing to share to amass a lot of data, but inevitably that data is going to be used for business, and that's growth.
It's growth, but it depends what country you're looking at. I mean,
That's what I was saying.
Yeah.
Regionally, there will have to be.
But it would be something like ag internet, no? Like you have the code, the basic code that's out there, and then in order to basically make it into the specific products, it's the packaging and it's also the flavors you add maybe. So.
Yeah, and a lot of businesses operate on that they do have some IP. So if it's their extra bit of code that they're able to patent, then that's.
But in a corrupt country, when the big companies are not audited in the same way they are in other countries, you just see so frequently like smaller farmers, etc., being like completely put out of business and being forced to like use their farms and sell off to other people. Like I'm from Kenya, it happens all the time with flower farming, with most types of farming. So I'm just like thinking of, and also you can patent it, can't you? A climate recipe. Yeah. This is what you were saying, that it's more.
There are companies that are trying to patent climate, and it's a lot of what drives us because we think that's ridiculous, and we think climate should be open. So I mean, it's not like we don't have that competition. It's not competition. It's a different ideology. And so there will be people who like our network, and there will be people who abuse it.
I'll let Chrissy ask her question, and then I'll add.
Is this project, I'm not sure, right? Somehow connected to the GMO way of doing it?
Well, it's somewhat connected in that we don't have to use fertilizer. I mean, also we're working in the phenome, we're not working in the genome, so we're modifying the genome at all, which is what GMOs are. And then we're also trying to keep the phenome open source as well, which is like
Yeah, what we're trying to do is open source the phenome, pretty much, by creating these databases of what different climate creates different plant expression. So that's what the Open Genome projects for cocoa, for peanuts are. This is the gene of this crop. This is how you could modify it. This is, So we're trying.
You are.
We're not doing any gene modification. No.
Because it's not allowed. That's what I'm saying. It's not allowed in European countries.
Yeah,
so
right.
They're very much against that. So this is
No, we're not doing that.
Yeah, like I said, it's somewhat related in that we're working in the phenome, and so like you're talking in general nutrition, and we don't do anything like genetically modify crops, but we don't use any pesticides as well, and so you can't call us organic by like USDA standards, because we don't grow in soil, and the definition of organic has a lot to do with the soil that it's grown in, so it's kind of in its own space. But the most we do is release ladybugs into the food server.
I think it should be very clear that this will help you with your project also.
Yeah. I mean, it's a hot debate in this country. I know that it's not okay in Europe, but for other countries where they have no ability, like they can't grow crops, GMO it's very controversial because it's not necessarily bad to some people. So it depends where you're from. It depends. Okay. So I think Alistair, you want to go?
Sure.
Okay. Cool. This is the final presentation, and then if anyone wants to stay around, ask questions in chat, you're more than welcome. There's lunch at 1:30, and then we can reconvene in the other room this afternoon to discuss the projects in more detail and some of the security concerns.
Hi everyone. I know it's been a long morning, so I'll try to be quick. So this is our project that we built in 2014. So it's 6 boxes, fits on 2 transportation pallets, it's waterproof, and it opens up to be a media center and library for about 100 people. So we built this, our organization is a library organization, and when we first started working, we were building physical libraries, first in Haiti, and then mostly West Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. And when we were working in Haiti, before the earthquake, you know, a lot of our mission was focused on cultural preservation work and a standard library. The earthquake hit, and the library that we had built became a central point for disaster relief, which is why we started to get into humanitarian work. And we quickly found that there were needs in humanitarian work, disaster relief, for a place, right? And a space to connect different actors, a space for different folks to be able to access tools. Building a library that's on a truck is about $200,000, and so that was kind of the first iteration of how do you make a multi-million-dollar library cheaper. And then we started to build something with UNICEF called the Story Box. That was just a box that's waterproof with books, right? Often you get book donations, actually very commonly, are donated in the wrong language, and people measure quantity, not quality. So the big thing for us is how do we make sure that, how do I stop this? How do we make sure that the contents that we provide are actually relevant? So this particular project is something that we've now implemented in Burundi, in 3 refugee camps in Burundi, in Azraq, in Jordan, in Amman, and most recently just got funding to bring the Ideas Box along the route. So we are working in, we're going to be in Lesbos, we're going to be in a few islands in Italy and France. We have a few boxes already. What's that? Macedonia? Balkans we're exploring, and then we already have work in France, and we're going to be in Dusseldorf soon as well. So this is this one idea. I also have another idea to show, and we're just kind of launching this. So if you take up your phone and sign on, you can sign on to this Wi-Fi that I'm creating from that yellow box right there. The Wi-Fi is called Kumbuk, and the password is KB Campus. So what we're offering is kind of, it's super low tech, but it's the server inside the Ideas Box that we found to be really useful. And if you sign on and go to just HTTP, sorry, this pen doesn't really work. So HTTP. It does. Yeah, I can.
Thanks.
So the password is capital B, capital K, capital B, and then campus. This one we used in Cameroon, so it's a lot of it's in French. But the idea is that you can preload, I mean, this is, again, not super high tech. You can preload Wikipedia, Khan Academy videos, TED Talks, anything you want in any format on a hard drive, create a Wi-Fi network, and anyone with their, with their phones, with a tablet, bring it along, we supply them too, can access anything that's on it. So, especially when we're working in Ethiopia on the Somali border where we're not allowed to have internet, this is really useful. And so you can browse Wikipedia as if you were online, and it's just the latest version of Wikipedia pre-downloaded. And so, I mean, the idea is how do we kind of leverage, how do we reimagine what a library can look like, right? Libraries across time have been everything for everyone. In Alexandria, it was a place where humans thought that they could capture all human knowledge. They've been places where you can, new moms can get pacifiers. And so our mission is a little bit broad and specific, right? By supporting libraries and librarians, it means we're kind of doing everything. So with this particular project, I guess, the question is, what do we fill it with? And how do we, who's implementing programs with this that would actually be useful? Did it work? Are people?
Yeah, it worked.
Yeah. It worked? You're on? Okay. We can play with it again later.
Can you put food computer instructions
Absolutely.
in there?
Yeah.
Great.
Did it only work for you? Did it work for anyone else? Okay. Great.
TED Talks.
So it's just and then if you bring your own content into this space, you can download anything onto your own phone, right? So if you want the video for yourself, you just click open and download. So one thing that we've learned that I'll just quickly mention is that technology, and I think especially to you folks who are working on the tech side of things, you know, not necessarily working with refugees, but working in other contexts, you can see a lot of tech innovations that have not been really useful. So the World Bank's reports on one laptop per child, for example, show no education impact whatsoever. The World Bank's reports on even providing textbooks to schools have shown no impact whatsoever on education. So how do we think about what tools, how do you actually leverage tools so that they have an impact, right? And our hypothesis, at least, is that you need a space and you need to build relationships around it. So for the most part, you know, designing something like this is maybe like 1% of the work. Everything else is building the wraparound services, building the relationships on the ground, and actually, you know, with something like this, filling it with content that's actually in the right language, relevant, exactly. So we are a team of about 50 people now. We're based in Paris and DC, and we traditionally have gotten support from folks like the Gates Foundation and folks who are working on libraries. And it's really recently that we started to work with refugees that we've started to work with Google. And we've started to work with folks outside of the library, traditional library realm. And you know, I think for us, our ambition is not to build an office in every space that we work in. And in fact, for most of the libraries that we've built, we've transferred ownership of the library to our local partners, right? So the IRC owns the Ideas Box in the 3 refugee camps in Burundi, right? So what we're looking for are partners to build the program with, do the needs assessment, figure out what the contents are. Our team in Paris and DC helps to think through, you know, some of the tech pieces and then implementation, evaluation. We fundraise together, and then we transfer the project over once we have a clear understanding of how it's kept. Yeah, so that's the Ideas Box, that's the Kumbuk, and this is one of about 20 projects that we have, and most of the other 18 are not with refugees. But I think this is where I think we're doing that I think is important and exciting. Thanks. Kumbuk right now is well, Kumbuka is to remember in Swahili, so we started it in Burundi, and we have been trialing it. We just made this in-house recently. In Cameroon, in Detroit also. We also work in the US. And we're thinking of how we can implement them in Europe.
Are you guys in contact with Coursera and with Kyron?
Yeah, so with a lot of the ed tech, we try and negotiate free licenses and work with them to get the content offline. So the push by MIT Scratch, for example, to get everything offline, we've been in that conversation with them for the last couple of years. And so how do we get the innovative technologies offline? Maybe relevant for the refugee context, but really relevant for American urban settings, is the fact that most of the ed technologies, and I'm getting back to this point that technology is not necessarily useful in and of itself, most of the ed tech is only used by people who already have one college degree, right? I mean, think about you guys who use Khan Academy. And you know, I love Khan. Khan Academy is one of our biggest partners. The French platform was made by our organization. It took us a couple of years to find French professors and create the Khan platform to prepare French students, particularly in the banlieue, to prepare for the baccalaureate. But you know, even if you look at our push to try and get new users, particularly from low-income communities, to use EdTech, often it's the onboarding that's actually really difficult. So, I mean, this afternoon when we talk about trust, a lot of that I think needs to also consider space. And thinking about how you break the ice with the actual technology. The barriers are so diverse, right? Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So you're talking about like using tech or like something like that in a place where internet's illegal. So what would you do in that case? Because I used to work in the Ogaden, and it's really scary if you're caught doing something illegal. So
well, you don't connect to the internet with this. This is not the internet.
Yeah, but if you're found doing that, and you know, like UN and ICRC were chucked out of the Ogaden because they were caught doing something that they weren't supposed to do. Like everyone's chucked out of that area, and then in the end, you know, you can't actually help people. So, do you like try and balance like what the negative impact would be, because it's like.
But this is where I think a lot of the work is happening right now, which is discussions with authorities about what we're allowed to put on and what we're not. I mean, it's trying to get everyone to have input on what is preloaded on the Kuhn book, and that's what's taking a while. So they're kind of negotiations involved too, right? But you're absolutely right. Yeah.
You were talking about educational impact statistics, and I guess what goes into that, and what goes into what defines impact, and for you too.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, for other people, it's test scores, right? And I mean, I think that's the easiest way to standardize it. And you know, unfortunately, most of the time, if you do a qualitative evaluation, it's not really trusted by everyone else. And so we do also look at test scores. The trouble that we're seeing, and this is something that, you know, if you guys are doing another hackathon, that I think would be really interesting to think about, this idea of certificates keeps coming up in the refugee education spaces that we're inhabiting right now. Some people say it's totally useless, nobody cares. Some people say it's so important, and then if it is important, how do you standardize it across all the different countries where people are moving? Which I think is an important question for refugees and also for everyone else in the world right now, that borders are becoming, you know, less and less clear. And then, you know, I would also say that education as a tool for employment is an important link to think through, and we're, you know, the big push also at a lot of these conferences, and you know, predictably from folks like the Clinton Global Initiative and others, is to find public-private partnerships, right? And what that means for us is talking with private companies, and of course there's so many policy issues that are involved with this too, and saying, you know, what are the skills that you need for employees? And if we offered these skills and could show that the users of our programs, of our informal education programs, could have these skills, can you give us some kind of contract that you'll employ them, right? So those are also part of the negotiations for how we think about what education content to put in.
Thank you very much to everyone. Does anyone have any more questions or want to go back to any of the presentations at the moment? Paula?
So, regarding the physical space, we're opening a migration lab in Lisbon, and there, you know, we're looking to bring people together, not that we pick, but that come to us by offering the right opportunities to them, and you know, just going into the refugee camps and communicating that you will find education there, that you can maybe also engage with NGOs or with local stakeholders, and we're looking at the things to provide to these people, and I think you guys would be excellent for that. So if you would be interested in talking about it, we have a concept, I can show it to you, and it's in development, but
Yeah. No, I think I would love to. One of the things that I would also hit upon is that from our experiences, a permanent space is really important. But so much of our past work was with outreach and with transportation. Ended up being two of the kind of the breakdown of costs involved with having a permanent space. Those end up being really a big portion. And so the goal with this, at least, was to try and go to where people already are, right? So where we've been setting this up in France and Australia and the US, which again is a very different context, is in laundromats and in public parks and in basketball courts, right? We're looking at Tempelhof in Berlin, right? How do we go somewhere that something is not where people already are,